I never thought a deathbed confession would destroy an entire family's legacy, but that's exactly what happened in the Harrison case. The woman dying in that hospital bed wasn't confessing to ease her conscience. She was dropping a bomb that would blow apart 3 generations of inheritance, identity, and trust. And I was the attorney who had to pick up the pieces. My name is Michael Chen, and I've been practicing law in Connecticut for 23 years. I've seen messy divorces, brutal custody battles, and families torn apart over money. But nothing prepared me for what Margaret Sullivan told me 2 hours before she died. It started with a phone call from Hartford General Hospital. A woman named Margaret Sullivan was requesting an attorney urgently. She had stage 4 cancer and wanted to make a confession. I assumed it was about a will or maybe some hidden assets. I was completely wrong. When I walked into that sterile hospital room, Margaret looked like she'd aged 30 years in the last 6 months. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes had that hollow look you see in people who know they're out of time. But those eyes were sharp, focused. She knew exactly what she was about to do. "Mr. Chen," she said, her voice raspy but determined, "I need you to witness what I'm about to say and make sure it gets to the right people. I don't care if they hate me. I don't care if they curse my name. But they deserve to know the truth." I sat down, pulled out my recorder, and asked if she consented to being recorded. She nodded. That recording would later be played in court, and let me tell you, it was like watching a nuclear bomb go off in slow motion. Margaret Sullivan had been the nanny for the Harrison family back in 1987. Robert Harrison III was a prominent businessman, old money Connecticut family, the kind that had streets named after them. His wife, Elizabeth, had just given birth to their son, Robert Harrison IV, at a private hospital in Greenwich. The baby was supposed to inherit everything: the fortune, the company, the estate, the family name that went back 5 generations. But here's where it gets twisted. Margaret had been having an affair with Robert Harrison III for 2 years. And she'd gotten pregnant. She gave birth to a boy just 3 days after Elizabeth Harrison did, in a different hospital across town. "I was young and stupid," Margaret said, her breathing labored. "I thought Robert would leave Elizabeth for me. I thought we'd be together. But after I had the baby, he told me it was over. Said he'd pay me to disappear, give the baby up for adoption, and never contact him again." I could see where this was going, and my stomach was already turning. "I was so angry," she continued. "Elizabeth treated me like I was beneath her. She had everything: the house, the man, the respect, the money. And I had nothing but a bastard child and a check to shut up and go away." Margaret paused, coughing violently. A nurse came in, adjusted her medication, and left. I waited. So I did something terrible. Something I've regretted every single day for 38 years. She looked directly at me, and I saw tears streaming down her face. I switched the babies. 3 words. That's all it took to change everything. She explained it methodically, like she'd rehearsed this confession 1,000 times in her head. Elizabeth Harrison had been recovering from a difficult delivery and was heavily sedated. Margaret was trusted staff, had full access to the nursery. During a shift change, when chaos happened and nobody was paying attention, she switched the hospital bracelets and the babies. Robert Harrison IV, the boy everyone thought was the biological son and heir, was actually Margaret's biological child with Robert Harrison III. And her son, the one she'd raised in poverty as a single mother under the name Daniel Sullivan, was actually Elizabeth and Robert's legitimate biological child. "I raised Daniel in a tiny apartment in Hartford," Margaret said, her voice breaking. "I worked 3 jobs. He never had anything. Meanwhile, my biological son grew up in a mansion, went to Yale, inherited millions when Robert III died 5 years ago. That should have been Daniel's life. That should have been his inheritance. I had to stop her there. Why are you telling me this now? Why not take it to your grave?" She smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was bitter, cold. "Because I'm dying, and Daniel deserves to know who he really is. He deserves what's rightfully his. And that family, that goddamn family, needs to know that the boy they've been grooming to carry on their precious legacy isn't even one of them." The legal nightmare that followed was unprecedented. I had to verify her claims first. Margaret had kept the original hospital records, the real bracelets, and several pieces of documentation that she'd hidden for nearly 4 decades. She'd planned this, you see. She'd always planned to tell the truth eventually. She just wanted to wait until it would cause maximum damage. I contacted Daniel Sullivan first. He was 38 years old, working as a construction foreman, divorced with 2 kids. When I told him what his mother had confessed, he didn't believe me. Who would? My mother wouldn't do something like that, he said. She's sick. She's confused. But DNA doesn't lie. We ran the tests. Daniel Sullivan was biologically the son of Elizabeth and Robert Harrison III. The man everyone knew as Robert Harrison IV was biologically Margaret's son. Then I had to contact the Harrison family. Robert IV, now in his late 30s, was CEO of Harrison Industries. He'd built his entire identity on being a Harrison. His mother Elizabeth was still alive, 73 years old, living in the family estate. They were preparing to celebrate the company's centennial anniversary. When I showed them the evidence, Elizabeth fainted. I'm not exaggerating. She literally collapsed. Robert IV's reaction was different. He got angry, furious. He accused me of fraud, conspiracy, extortion. He threatened to sue me, have me disbarred, destroy my career. But the DNA tests came back. Confirmed. Undeniable. Robert Harrison IV was not a Harrison by blood. Daniel Sullivan was. The inheritance case that followed was brutal. Under Connecticut law and the terms of Robert Harrison III's trust, only biological descendants could inherit. The estate was worth approximately $47 million, not counting the company's shares and property holdings. Everything was tied to bloodline. Robert IV fought it with everything he had. His attorneys argued that he'd been raised as a Harrison, that he'd been legally recognized as the son and heir, that Daniel had no right to come in 3 decades later and claim everything. They called it legal identity versus biological identity. Daniel's case, which I handled, was simpler. The trust specified biological descendants. Margaret's confession and the DNA evidence proved Daniel was the biological son. Robert IV was not. The judge took 6 months to deliberate. It was the most complicated inheritance case in Connecticut history. The media had a field day. Switched at birth. The $40 million baby mix-up ran on every major network. Elizabeth Harrison testified. She was frail, broken. She talked about raising Robert IV, loving him as her son, never suspecting anything. She said she felt like she'd lost 2 children, the baby that was stolen from her and the son she'd raised who wasn't biologically hers. Margaret died 2 weeks into the trial. She never showed remorse. Her final statement, read in court, was defiant. I wanted them to feel what I felt. I wanted them to lose everything. Robert IV's wife filed for divorce halfway through the trial. She said she couldn't handle the scandal, the media attention, the uncertainty. They had 3 children together. Those kids were in therapy, trying to understand why their grandfather wasn't really their grandfather. Daniel testified too. He talked about growing up poor, watching his mother work herself to death, never understanding why they struggled so much. He said he didn't want to hurt anyone, but he couldn't deny who he was. The judge finally ruled. Daniel Sullivan was legally entitled to the inheritance as the biological son and heir under the terms of the trust. However, the judge also ruled that Robert IV had been defrauded and was entitled to compensation for being raised under false pretenses. The estate was split. Daniel received 60%, Robert IV received 40%, recognizing his years as the presumed heir and CEO. Nobody was happy. Daniel got millions but lost any chance of a relationship with his biological mother Elizabeth, who blamed him for the revelation. Robert IV got millions but lost his identity, his family legacy, and his position as CEO of Harrison Industries. Elizabeth Harrison died 6 months after the verdict. The doctors said it was a heart attack, but everyone knew she died of a broken heart. The company struggled. Robert IV tried to stay on as CEO, but the board forced him out. They couldn't have a non-Harrison running Harrison Industries. Daniel didn't want the job. He sold his shares and moved to Oregon with his kids. The mansion was sold. The family legacy, 5 generations of Connecticut history, ended with a deathbed confession from a bitter woman who wanted revenge. I've thought about this case every day since it ended. Margaret Sullivan committed one of the cruelest acts I've ever encountered, and she did it consciously, deliberately. She raised one child in poverty while watching the other live in luxury, knowing she could end it at any time. She chose not to because the pain was the point. The destruction was the goal. Robert IV came to see me a year after the verdict. He looked 10 years older. He told me he'd started going by a different name, Robert Sullivan, taking his biological mother's surname. He said he didn't know who he was anymore. My whole life was a lie, he said. Every memory, every achievement, every relationship, built on a foundation that never existed. I didn't have any words of comfort for him. What could I say? Daniel tried to reach out to Elizabeth before she died. He wanted to know his biological mother. She refused to see him. In her mind, he represented everything that had been stolen from her. The baby she should have raised. The life that should have been. The saddest part? None of this was these men's fault. They were innocent babies, victims of an angry woman's revenge. But they paid the price for her bitterness. They lost their identities, their families, their sense of self. Margaret Sullivan wanted to destroy the Harrison family for their perceived betrayal, and she succeeded. But she also destroyed her own son, the innocent man she raised, and the innocent man her biological child had become. There were no winners, only casualties. This case taught me something dark about human nature. Revenge doesn't heal wounds. It multiplies them. It spreads the pain like a virus, infecting everyone it touches. Margaret spent 38 years carrying her hatred, and when she finally unleashed it, she took down an entire family tree. I still have the recording of her confession. Sometimes late at night, I listen to it again, try to understand what kind of person does something like this. But I never find answers. Just more questions. The Harrison estate is gone now. Subdivided and sold. The company was absorbed by a larger corporation. The family name exists only in history books and newspaper archives of a scandal that nobody wants to remember. 2 boys were switched at birth by a vengeful nanny who wanted to punish a family for their privilege. By the time the truth came out, it was too late to fix anything. You can't give someone back the childhood they lost. You can't restore an identity that never existed. I've handled dozens of cases since then, but none have haunted me like this one. Because in the end, everyone lost. Margaret got her revenge, but she died alone and hated. Daniel got his inheritance but lost his history. Robert got compensation but lost himself. Elizabeth lost everything. Her child, her legacy, her will to live. The courthouse where we tried this case has a famous inscription above the entrance. Justice, truth, law. But in the Harrison case, I learned that sometimes truth and justice don't align. Sometimes the truth destroys more than it heals. Sometimes knowing what really happened is worse than never knowing at all. I'm retired now, but I still think about those 2 men, Daniel and Robert, and wonder if they ever found peace. I wonder if they ever forgave the woman who played God with their lives. I wonder if Elizabeth forgave anyone before she died, or if she went to her grave carrying the weight of betrayal and loss. Margaret Sullivan got what she wanted. The Harrison family was destroyed. But in destroying them, she destroyed everything and everyone she claimed to love. That's the thing about revenge. It consumes everything in its path, including the person seeking it. This case file sits in my old office, a reminder of the darkest aspects of human nature I've ever encountered in 23 years of practice. It's a reminder that some wounds never heal, some truths are too painful to bear, and some acts of revenge echo across generations, leaving nothing but devastation in their wake.